What's up, YouTube? Today we're taking a look at the Moondrop Rays, a gaming-focused evolution of the very successful Moondrop May. The Moondrop Rays comes in at $99, at least in the US, and sports the same hybrid driver configuration as the $75 Moondrop May, consisting of a dynamic driver and an annular planar driver. The Rays have received some early criticism for supposedly charging for different DSP profiles versus the for now cheaper Moondrop May, so in this review we'll dig into whether the Rays is really worth shelling out an additional $25 for. Before we get into the review, I want to give a quick disclaimer that my review unit was sent out to me by Shenzhen Audio. As always, I'm not being paid to make this review, and my thoughts and opinions are my own. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the review. The Moondrop Rays comes in a white box with Moondrop's trademark anime waifu illustration on the front. Inside, you'll get the IEMs themselves, the Gravity DSP-enabled 2-pin to USB-C cable, a surprisingly minimal ear tip selection, a brown pleather zippered carry case, the usual assortment of user manuals, warranty cards, and quality control pass jets, and thoughtfully, a male USB-A to female USB-C extension cable for use with a desktop PC. This extension cable is pretty long and should make the intended use case for these IEMs a lot more viable, so I was very pleased to see this in the box. Next, let's talk about the build. The Rays feature green translucent resin housings and metal faceplates with a polished reflective PVD coating. This is an unapologetically gamery design, and honestly, I'm here for it. Unfortunately, in what seems like an established trend from Moondrop at this point, I have noticed that the faceplate coating is starting to wear a bit after barely using these IEMs for more than a week or two daily driving them. I also found that the 2-pin ports on the IEMs on one side were super tight, and I actually pulled the external 2-pin connector housing free of the connectors trying to switch the cable so that I could measure the Rays without DSP. I was able to snap the housing back into place, but I did feel that this needed to be called out. The Moondrop Rays share the same form factor as the Moondrop May, and thus are extremely comfortable, including for bedtime listening thanks to the low profile fit. Isolation is pretty average, which may or may not bother you when you're using these in any kind of gaming scenario where you're using them to talk to teammates over voice chat, thanks to the occlusion effect. Speaking of gaming with teammates, I do want to say that I did try using the built-in inline microphone on these, and was immediately ridiculed by my friends for sounding like I was using a webcam mic, so don't buy these expecting them to replace a dedicated streaming or recording microphone. With all of that out of the way, let's pull up the graph and talk about the sound. I'll also leave a link to these measurements in the video description. I will also note that while these measurements were done with the stock gray silicone ear tips, I used the EPZ M100 liquid silicone ear tips with the Rays for my subjective evaluation. The Rays do integrate with Moondrop's updated Link app, which gives you access to 5 built-in EQ presets, plus additional downloadable presets for different games, user-created presets, and custom parametric EQ. I'm excited to see Moondrop continue to push their app experience forward and give users who may not be super comfortable dialing in their own EQ presets a chance to experiment and try new sound profiles easily. I did most of my listening using the default DSP tuning, though after reviewing the graphs I could also see the Rhythm Game DSP preset sounding pretty good for general music listening if you want a brighter tilted frequency response than the default preset. I honestly think that an average of these two profiles would be absolutely perfect, but for now, let's talk about how the Rays sound with the default tuning. The frequency response here is pretty close to classic Moondrop, but is actually a little bit more neutral than we've come to expect. If you compare the default Rays frequency response to the Moondrop May's frequency response, you can see that the Rays is just a little bit more rolled off in the sub-bass, with a hint of an elevation around 100 Hz, which is an interesting change from the sub-bass shelf we're so used to seeing nowadays. The tunings are pretty identical from 150 Hz to about 3 kHz, where they diverge again. The Moondrop May carries its energy in the presence region for just a little bit longer, whereas the Moondrop Rays dips off more past 5 kHz. I'd also say that the Rays has a more even and refined treble response than the May. These two differences actually make a surprisingly huge difference in the Rays' overall presentation, and in a good way, at least in my opinion. Because of the presence reduction and the more restrained upper treble presentation, the Moondrop Rays comes off as a bit warmer and more grounded compared to the May, which sounds thinner and a little too bright up top, despite having audibly more sub-bass extension. Let's move on to technical performance. The bass is adequate in terms of punch, slam, and impact, but I would have preferred that Moondrop had kept the more elevated sub-bass level from the Moondrop May, as I just would like a little bit more heft and power to the low-end response. The bass is pretty nimble and well articulated, with decent texture and minimal bass bleed despite the more mid-bass focused bass response. The mid-range is clear, vibrant, and natural sounding in terms of timbre. Male vocals are detailed, very intelligible, and sufficiently gritty sounding, but occasionally sibilant and could use more body and warmth overall. Female vocals are similarly detailed and intelligible, but are pretty bright sounding to the point of being borderline fatiguing. On the other hand, I am pretty happy with the presentation of distorted electric guitars, as I don't find them overly bright or having the buzzsaw character that I detest so much on IEMs with too much presence. On another positive note, analog percussion sounds snappy and organic and is free of compression artifacts. The treble is surprisingly good for a $100 IEM. It definitely still falls on the engaging and exciting side of the fence despite the more restrained approach to the upper treble compared to its predecessor, and it is a little bit splashy when it comes to treble transient delivery, but it's very, very detailed with a good amount of upper treble air. Imaging, staging, and instrument separation are all very good as well. To wrap this up, the Moondrop Rays are a definite improvement out of the box compared to the Moondrop May in terms of tuning and seemingly further improved technical performance, but it's an open question whether they're worth the higher price tag. I think if you already own the Moondrop May, and you're comfortable cooking up your own EQ presets, you can probably get away with just EQing the May to the Ray's improved target curves. However, for newcomers seeking a truly plug-and-play experience, I do think that the Rays is the better option, particularly with the included USB extension cable. Before I close out the video, I do want to share some updates on the future of the channel. As you're probably aware, President Trump has unilaterally imposed blanket tariffs on Chinese imports, and ended the de minimis threshold loophole on small packages coming into the US from China. Between these tariffs and the Chinese retaliatory tariffs, there is, at least for the moment, an effective trade embargo between the US and China. This will have the effect of making the headphone hobby and many others prohibitively expensive to US customers for as long as these tariffs are in place. I don't know for sure what this means to me as a headphone reviewer, but I have to assume that I will not be receiving any review units for the foreseeable future. I would love to be proven wrong, but I've made my peace with it. I've been truly fortunate to have been an active reviewer in the audio space for almost a decade, and I'm thankful to every manufacturer, retailer, reader, and viewer who has made that possible for me. It's been a good run. This is not the end of Bedrock Reviews, but at least for the time being, my upcoming content is going to be focused more on instructional and explanatory content in the photography and filmmaking niche. If that's not your thing, I understand, but I'd appreciate if you shared my channel with someone you know who it might resonate with. If you'd like to keep supporting the channel during this pivot, just watching or sharing a video really goes a long way. I really appreciate you sticking around until the end of the video. I appreciate it more than you know. Until next time, this is Bedrock Reviews, signing off.